Welcome inside episode 699 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Brandon Pillar up in the Blue Mountains. Ross is away today. He's trying to make his way down to Florida. Wish him the best of luck and wish everybody the best of luck this holiday season. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, as we have a World Junior preview for you with the Athletics' Scott Wheeler. He's going to tell you all about who the favorites are and about how each Sens prospect, all four of them, should do on their respective teams. I'll also quickly touch on the 3-2 overtime loss that the Sens suffered at the hands of the Washington Capitals. And today's game that was supposed to be up against the Detroit Red Wings is postponed. We're going to get into that and a whole lot more on today's episode of the Locked On Senators podcast. Here we go.
You're Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today is December 23rd. It's a Friday, and lots of people are getting ready for the holiday. And if you're in Ontario, you're probably getting ready for what's supposed to be a big storm as I look out my window here in the Blue Mountains, and it seems like it's coming. But the storm, that already postponed tonight's game that was supposed to be up against the Detroit Red Wings at the CTC of the second part of a back-to-back. But I think the Ottawa Senators, Sens fans, and myself included are very thankful that that game is postponed. I want to thank you for making the Locked On Senators podcast your first listen of the day. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Google, wherever you get your podcast. We're free and available. And as Ross likes to say, be a friend. Tell a friend that they can subscribe to the Locked On Senators podcast. Give us a 5-star review. It goes a long way for the algorithm. And a quick thumbs up on YouTube. It's free to do. And I mean, it's the holiday season. It's the giving season. So give us a review. Give us a thumbs up. Subscribe. It is very much appreciated. The Ottawa Senators did not appreciate being down a few players in last night's game up against the Capitals. Luckily, Tim Stützle gets back into the lineup, and he ends up playing a career-high 27 minutes and 52 seconds in his first game back from a shoulder injury. But the only reason he had to play that much is because Tyler Mott went down very early. He was hooked on a play and kind of fell on his back again after just coming back from a similar injury. And then Rourke Chartier blocks a shot with his hand and he leaves the game. So the Sens are down 2 players for the better half of this game. And somehow, some way, they hold on. Well, somehow, definitely Cam Talbot was a big part of that. He was my Sens Central standout on the postcast last night, with the Sens getting outshot 40-25 and taking this game all the way to overtime. 3-2, they lose. Drake Batherson continues his point streak, 10-game point streak for Drake Batherson, and he gets his 9th power play goal, and he has 14 points in that 10-game stretch. But ultimately, this one comes down to overtime, and sure, if you're the Senators, you're happy that you get a point here because you're doing whatever you can to climb up the standings in the Eastern Conference to try to get close to that wild card spot. But the issue is the Washington Capitals are one of those teams ahead of you. So when you go to overtime, you know they're getting either 1 or 2 points. And this time, Marcus Johansson skates down the wing. He rips one blocker side past Cam Talbot. And it's the Capitals that end up with 2 points here. And your Ottawa Senators only have 1 point. So with that overtime loss, the Senators now are 9 points out of a wildcard spot from those Washington Capitals, and they sit with a 14-16-3 record. They're 5-3-2 in their last couple games. And that's not exactly where the Senators thought they would be, but considering all the injury troubles, it's not terrible. They've had a decent month, as DJ Smith mentions, and it could have gone a lot worse, that's for sure. So let's make our way over to our interview with Scott Wheeler, as the World Juniors, they start on Boxing Day, so on Monday. So we get you all set for that. But before we do that, we got to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by NHTSA. And guys, this is an important message, especially around this time of year. You're hanging out with some friends and family. It's the holidays. You don't have to work. You're having a couple drinks, and that's fine. But a few drinks become a few too many, and you just realize that you drove there and you didn't plan ahead. So maybe you're thinking, all right, you live nearby. It's not a big deal. It's just a couple turns from your aunt and uncle's house to get back home. You'll be fine. You need to think again, because maybe you're thinking, what are the odds I'll get pulled over? And even so, what's the worst that can happen? My insurance will go up. I lose my license, lose my job, total your car, or worse, you can harm someone, even kill someone. It's very serious. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are often tragic and deadly. Even so, that doesn't always stop people from thinking twice. It's so easy to plan ahead, have a designated driver, call an Uber, stay the night, walk home, whatever you got to do. Just take that extra second to think about what you're doing before you get behind the wheel when you've been drinking. So if you think you're okay to drive after a couple drinks, think again. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. And now let's head to our interview with the Athletics' Scott Wheeler.
All right, we now welcome on a very special guest, a good friend of the show. It's writer with The Athletic, their prospect guru. It's Scott Wheeler, who's heading out to Halifax and Moncton over the next few weeks, covering the World Juniors. Scott, first question, how nice will it be to be among fans finally? I know you've covered the last couple World Juniors all by yourself.
Good, yeah. Obviously the Edmonton tournament was weird. I covered it the first of 3 times around. It was completely empty. It was basically me and Mark Masters in the building, and that was it. Second time around was a little bit busier, but still obviously empty. Greater media presence, and then midway through the tournament, I'm suddenly running down to my hotel desk to see if I can cancel the rest of my hotel stay and get an earlier flight home. And then the summer one was just weird, right? Until that gold medal game, which really saved that tournament. Like, let's be honest, that tournament was ugly from top to bottom. There was everything happening with Hockey Canada. Nobody in Edmonton seemed to even know that the tournament was being played. The crowds were brutal. And then suddenly you get probably 75, 80% full for the gold medal game, and you get one of the greatest finishes to a hockey game that I've ever seen live and probably ever will see live. In just that overtime play, and Mason McTavish and Kent Johnson playing hero, and suddenly it got a montage moment, right? I think TSN wants a montage moment out of every World Juniors, and that was it. That's in the montage for the rest of time now, and that's going to live on for Mason McTavish's entire career. So, but really until that classic in the finale, it was a tough tournament, and the crowds were not what it's going to be in Halifax. I've been told by Hockey Canada that both barns are now sold out. I don't think all of the games are going to end up being sold out. Not every game is going to be full, even though they've sold tickets for them, because I think a lot of folks are going to try to resell tickets on the sort of secondary market for the non-Canada games, the non-big boy games. But Canada, by all accounts, every single game is going to be sold. 13,000 people in that barn there. And it's gonna feel like the tournament again. Really, outside of Russia not participating, it's really going to feel as close to the real thing as we've had in some time here. And I can't wait for sort of the tournament. Can't wait to get out there. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And this Team Canada is, from a Canadian perspective, is as good a roster on paper as they've iced in a long time. This is a really, really special group talent-wise, especially in the top 6 up front, and it's gonna be this team's gonna fill the net, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the top 6 of Canada is always good, but as Senators fans, we're probably a little more interested in that bottom 6 there, as Zach Ostapchuk, who you wrote a great article on, guys. If you haven't checked it out already, go to The Athletic, subscribe, check out Scott's article on Zach Ostapchuk. Great story about how he kind of rise through the ranks and how people supported him along the way. We saw Zach Ostapchuk last year kind of have that bottom 6 grinder type role, but as you mentioned in the article, there's room for him kind of anywhere on this lineup. What role do you see him playing this time around with Team Canada?
Yeah, it's interesting. Zach was not even really supposed to be on that team in the summertime, right? He had that brilliant playoffs where they were the 8th seed and they upset the top seeded Everett Silvertips. And lo and behold, on the other bench is Dennis Williams, who was an assistant coach with the team. His own coach, Mike Dick, was also an assistant coach with that team. And even still had and Hockey Canada staff, James Boyd of the Ottawa 67s, told me this. He said if they'd had Cole Perfetti and Shane Wright and Dylan Genther and all those guys who said no, if they'd had even one or two of those guys, Zach was sort of their last call. He was the guy that they called latest in the process. And then suddenly he's not just in camp, he's on the team. And then suddenly he's playing an important role. He was a really good penalty killer for them. A sort of excellent sort of bottom six checker type. They got that line that he was on, got after it and played heavy minutes on the forecheck. And that's, I think, what they're expecting now. Now he's a returnee. I thought they might have considered him for an assistant captaincy when they named their assistant captains a couple of days ago. I was kind of half expecting him to maybe get an A. But they kind of went with they went with 4 assistants, 2 for each game, and the fourth guy that they reportedly sort of gave the A to was Nathan Gaucher. And I thought if there was going to be one of those guys, it might be Zach. So no, just I expect him to do the same thing. He's a big kid, obviously 6'3", 200 plus pounds, but he's also an excellent skater, especially north-south, less so going side to side, but he can really chase guys and hunt on the forecheck and get after it. And he drives the net as fearlessly as anybody in junior hockey, like just kind of almost a reckless abandon when he's got the puck, just wants to take it to the pipe, right? So that piece of it is just, that's what they're expecting him to be. And I think he'll start in the bottom 6. The way they've designed the lines early on, it looks like they're really going to go with a highly talented top 6 and a sort of muck and grind bottom 6. But over the course of the tournament, that typically changes. You typically end up with a guy like a Zach Ostapchuk playing on a line with a Shane Wright or a Connor Bedard or a Logan Stankoven. Like, they tend to mix and match as the tournament progresses, and they like to have one of those sort of real go-getters, those forechecking types, play with the skill guys. So I think if that happens, he makes natural sense as a winger to move up and play with one of Wright or Stankoven in the top 6 there. And they're not going to do that with a Nathan Gaucher because he's a center, right? So Nathan, if they're looking for a big sort of faster forechecking player to move up, it does feel like it's going to be Zach. Zach can take draws as well. He's played a good chunk of center in junior hockey, but he's going to be a winger at the next level and a winger on this team. And I could see him sort of bouncing around the lineup as they try to get guys going and all of that. So I think he's going to be an important piece. He's not going to be counted upon to score. I think you'll see his production kind of similar to what it was last time. He had 3 points in 7 games. If he has 3, 4, if he had 5 points in 7 games, that would be a great tournament for him. But it's on the PK defensive zone draws. That's the role they're going to ask him to play.
Scott, we got a little overzealous when we saw the lines on the first day of selection camp at left wing with Shane Wright down the middle and Connor Bedard at right. And that speaks to you and what you're saying about his versatility up and down. I know the Sens liked him at center last season when he earned that contract at a training camp. He was kind of playing down the middle, but I agree with you. I think as a left winger, guy who's going to be first in on the forecheck, that's where he's going to be at his best. But up front, that top 6, 2 draft eligibles. When's the last time we've seen that with not only Connor Bedard, but Adam Fantilli?
Yeah, pretty rare and rare to see them in the top 6. We've had 2 or 3 draft eligibles on teams before, but these guys are going to be counted upon to be sort of in the all-star conversation, right? Like they if Canada's going to win a gold medal, they're going to need Shane Wright and Logan Stankoven to be dynamite, 1-2 down the middle. And they're going to need those 2 guys to probably be their best wingers. I think everybody expects that Dylan Genther is going to have a big tournament, but Connor Bedard and Adam Fantilli are capable of doing the 2 points per game thing, right? Like, they're capable of having that kind of Mason McTavish tournament that he had in the summer where you're chasing records and you've got 13, 14, 15 points. I think that's really what they're going to need from those guys. And they've got a group where they're going to be able to do that as well. They've got the Swedes and the Czechs in the group, and those will both be 2 good games. But the other 2 teams in Canada's group are arguably the 2 weakest teams in the tournament. And I think you're going to see some 10-goal, some kind of double-digit spots put up. So there's going to be some big numbers put up on this Canadian team, and it's just a matter of of who, right? And even Shane Wright, he had that disappointing, it was obviously only 2 games, but that disappointing showing the first time around in Edmonton where he was playing with Cole Perfetti on the second line. And at the end of those 2 games, Cole Perfetti had 6 points and he led the tournament in scoring. And Shane had only chipped in a secondary assist on those 6 points of Perfetti's. So Shane, I think, feels a lot of pressure to be the guy. He was that for them at U18s when they won the gold medal in Texas. Shane and Connor Bedard were the 2 best players on that team, and I think they're going to look for that again. But as far as the draft eligibles go, I mean, there may not be more talented players in the tournament than either of Bedard or Fantilli, and that's pretty rare for 17-year-olds. 18 in Fantilli's case because of the fall birthday.
So just to quickly follow up on that, both of them are going to play wing this tournament, but you expect them, when we talk to you in the draft process, they're both going to be centers at the next level?
Bedard, I think the case is still out. He's going to have to prove to whatever coach he plays for that he can be responsible defensively. As great as Bedard was scoring at the Summer World Juniors, I think that tournament revealed that defensively there are still some warts. His line early on with Mason McTavish, they got hemmed in a lot. People forget that about that tournament. And come the medal round, Bedard was moved into a third line role because they didn't want that line to get hemmed in. So he's got to prove that. He's played with a lot more of a chip on his shoulder and a feistier game this year. And I think that will endear himself to coaches in terms of sticking down the middle. And then on top of that, he wants to be a center, and it's going to be very difficult for anybody to say no to Connor Bedard. So I think they both end up at center. Fantilli's made for that, right? Like, he's just a horse. He's one of the best skaters in the draft, maybe the best skater in the draft, despite being 6'2", 6'3", and heavy. And that's just such a rare combination. So I fully expect that Fantilli will end up down the middle, and Connor, probably more of a coin flip, but I'd lean center for Connor. You're just going to want the puck in his hands as much as possible, and playing down the middle will get him that.
I know Pillsy's chomping at the bit to ask you about the 67's prospect in the tournament. No, not Jack Matier. We'll get to that. But how many other draft eligibles are there in the tournament? Are there some other guys we should be keeping our eye on starting that process?
Yeah, certainly the Slovaks, this back-to-back age groups, right? These are 2 of the best age groups consecutively that the Slovaks have ever produced. Last year, we obviously know Simon Nemec and Juraj Slavkovsky and Philip Meshar with the Montreal Canadiens. This year, the same thing, though. They've got this kid by the name of Samuel Honzik, who's lit it up on Zach Ostapchuk's team with the Vancouver Giants in the WHL. He's going to be a late first-rounder. Filip Sirnik, who's playing in Sweden but is Slovak, is potentially going to be kind of a second or third rounder. And then the big one is for the Slovaks is Dalibor Dvorsky, who isn't going to be a top 5 guy, but is kind of in that 10 range. I think you'll see him go kind of 8 to 12 somewhere. And just a really, really talented, smooth sort of finesse player. There are questions about pace and whether he'll be a center or a winger. He was developed as a center, but he's played more wing and really not a great skater. So that's the big question mark with Dvorsky, but he's gonna make some plays off the flank and power play and all of that. He's gonna do some damage. So those guys are obviously sort of the bigger names, if you will, but right through this group, there are a couple of draft eligibles. And then even for next year, Aaron Kiviharju, this is a Finnish blue line that wasn't eligible to bring back anyone other than Aleksi Haimosalmi of the Carolina Hurricanes. So only one returnee on the Finnish blue line. And there's a good chance, by the way that they've sort of put together their pairings, I think there's a real good chance you'll see Aaron Kiviharju playing 20 minutes a night as technically a 16-year-old, right? So Kiviharju is a kid who's going to be a top 10 pick in the 2024 draft. And this is his opportunity to really sort of stake his claim maybe as more than that. The challenge with Kiviharju is the classic challenge of Samuel Girard and some of the sort of smaller players that have come through in recent years, right? Olin Zellweger, Quinn Hughes. Teams really do struggle drafting the 5'9", 5'10" defenseman in the top 5, right? So I think he's got the talent for that, but may end up being more of a top 10 pick. So lots of compelling sort of narratives as far as draft eligibles for this year and next go.
Yeah, normally Sens fans would be all over, all right, who are the next big names in the next draft? We're hoping this time around we're less focused on the up-and-coming draft-eligible players, and we're focusing on the guys that are already in the Sens system. And the biggest name in the World Junior Championship this year for Sens Prospects is Tyler Boucher from Team USA. Now, it seems there's always controversy when Boucher's name is mentioned, but one thing I want to ask you is, I believe he is the only CHL player on this USA roster. What's up with that, and why was he able to kind of break the mold there and go on to Team USA while being in the CHL?
I think the big thing for Tyler, the big advantage he has is that he's for an event like this where you're throwing a team together and you're asking them to come together quickly. He's one of the most beloved players that's come through USA hockey in a long, long time in terms of the memories that they have of him from the NTDP. And Sasha Pastujov, who's playing in the CHL, played at the NTDP too as well, right? But he was always one of those guys. I've told this story before, but I once had someone with USA Hockey say Tyler Boucher could take out a mortgage and live on his own and sort of be an adult tomorrow, right? And that's kind of how he's always been perceived. He's been perceived as a very mature kid, very well-spoken kid. And then in a tournament like this, just the perfect fourth liner, right? Like he's just the classic like depth player in a tournament like this, similar to Ostapchuk, where you could play him up as a physical presence to get a top six line going if they went cold. You can also play him down in the lineup. I do worry with him. He's going to be one of those kids who potentially hits someone a little bit too hard.
Yeah,
and the
we've seen that already.
He's not forgiving that way. I think Canada's got a couple of kids like that too. I think there's a real good chance that a Nathan Gaucher or a Brennan Othman or an Adam Fantilli or an Ostapchuk or an Ethan Del Mastro gets suspended over the course of this tournament. But Boucher energizing guy, works his tail off, gets after it, physical, a presence over his skates in terms of how physically mature and athletic he is. Just a really, really strong, sturdy kid. And then he's got that shot too. That shot's always going to be an asset for him. He can really rip it. So in an event like this, the combination of the familiarity that USA Hockey already had with him, and then also just that physical presence that very few players in today's game have, I think that made him a natural sort of bottom six guy for this team.
It looks like he's going to start on a line with Red Savage and Dylan Duke. Is it safe to say that line's going to have one goal, and that's skate fast and forecheck on and create loose pucks and havoc in the O-zone?
Yeah, and that looks like it's going to be their third line to start. Savage is a double returnee. He was in both of the Edmonton tournaments. Savage is the perfect two-way center for an event like this. And then Duke, right? What's that?
Wings pick?
Yeah, Red Wings pick, who plays at Ohio, and just a really sort of excellent in the face-off circle, penalty killer, great two-way center. May not play in the NHL, but at this level, he's a really good player. And then Duke is, despite being 5'9", is one of the scrappiest, sort of feistiest players. He scores all of his goals at the net front. One of the best net front players in the NCAA. Just tips and redirects and rebounds. Like he's the king of that. Kind of the antithesis to what you'd expect a 5'9" winger to be. So I really like that, the makeup of that line if they stick with it. Obviously it's early and they've got pre-tournament games to tinker, and I'm sure they'll try all sorts of things. But if those three end up together, that's a very good third line in this kind of an event.
And another CHL prospect that is a Sens prospect, one of the guys that I really love this pick from the Sens is Thomas Hamara. He's going to be playing on Team Czechia, and he was with the team last tournament, and he seemed like a guy that, I don't want to say a lock, but it seemed fairly likely that he was going to come back. And in the last tournament, Sens fans had their eye on him, and there were some ups and there were some downs in his tournament, that's for sure. What do you anticipate he's going to look like this year now that he's got a little more experience under his belt and is kind of more acclimatized to the North American style game?
Well, it's interesting. Typically, when a guy's a returnee, you expect them to take on a much bigger role. And with Thomas, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. The Czechs have the most returnees in the event. They're bringing back 19 players, which is absolutely insane. Typically, it's 7-8 players come back, right? And to have 19, I mean, really, other than David Jiricek and Jan Mysak, who are, let's be honest, the two best players on that team, and neither of them are returning. But really, outside of those two guys, everyone's back. So as a result, it's actually a pretty deep blue line. Like he's not going to be the number one or number two guy like you'd maybe expect of a returnee. But he's also only a draft +1. Like people forget that he was technically an underager in the summer tournament, right? Even though he'd been drafted, he was still supposed to be his draft eligible tournament. And there were a lot of 20-year-olds who also played in that tournament. So it was always going to be highs and lows his first time around. But I expect him to be kind of a second pairing guy, play 19 minutes a night. He might be able to chip in on both special teams as well. Interesting situation with him in Kitchener this year, where he went into a team, that Kitchener team wanted to contend, and they basically gave him and Hunter Brustevich, who's a potential late first-round pick in the 2023 draft, they gave both of them an equal opportunity to win PP1 there. And Brustevich ended up winning it after training camp and their preseason schedule. So Hamara's numbers in the OHL don't maybe pop like you might expect for a player of his sort of notoriety. He was great when I was in Germany for U18s. Like, he was excellent for that Czech team, and was their clear number one in that tournament. Him and Edward Chalet and Yuri Kulich had just excellent performances. But the World Juniors is a different animal. It's a higher level, and they're in a group with Finland and Canada. So it's going to be interesting. I think they'll give the Finns a really good game, and I expect Hamara to be a big part of that. They made the bronze medal game in the summer, right? They upset the US and played for bronze. So that Czech team is no joke, and I'm looking forward to watching them. And Hamara should be an important piece of that blue line, even if he's not the sort of number one guy, right?
Yeah, they always play tough, physical hockey. I like it. They're always hard on getting pucks back whenever they're gone. I appreciate watching the way they play, whereas they might not have the top end skills the other teams. Do you see him potentially playing with Jurček on a top pair with Czechia, or is he going to be a little bit down the line?
Well, Jurček's not playing, so Jurček and Mishek.
So he's probably not going to play with Jurček, Ross.
Yeah, there's the answer.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, well, let's move on to the final. Our favorite, Tyler Boucher is a good friend of the show too, but we've had a really good conversation or two with Oscar Pettersson with Team Sweden. He was a guy who wasn't on everybody's radar going into this season, but with 15 goals in, I believe, 15 games, give or take, in junior, and then getting a chance with Rogla playing in the SHL more consistently, getting more minutes in that level, he worked his way onto this team. He told us that he'd been playing with Philip Bistad and with Leo Carlsson in the international play going forward. Do you think they could roll into the tournament with that line, or is he more likely to play in a bit more of a depth role?
I think you'll likely see he'll play with one of those guys almost certainly, but I think you'll likely see both of those guys at center in the tournament. Those are both natural centers. Carlsson and Bystad are natural centers, and Noah Austin is a natural center. And I think the best potential makeup for this roster for Team Sweden is to be good down the middle. I mean, Austin, Carlsson, and Bystad, that's as good a 1-2-3 down the middle as any team in the tournament has, Canada included, for my money. Those three players are all three of the, 5 best players on Team Sweden. So I could imagine him playing with Philip. I think him and Bystad would make a lot of sense on a third line. I wouldn't even call it a third line at that point, because I think those top 3 will be pretty interchangeable. But it sounds like they're going to really load up the top 9 and then have a classic sort of fourth line. And he played really well with those guys through the fall schedule, right? The difference between the U20 team in Finland and Sweden and over there is that they actually play a pretty regular, consistent schedule from August through till November, where they're together about once a month to play competitive games. And he worked his way onto the roster more in those games than he did with Rogla and the domestic side. Rogla's obviously got a great thing. I've got a ton of respect going for the Abbott twins who run that program there. And they've done a really nice job developing players recently with Moritz Seider and Marco Kasper. I wish Marco Kasper were participating in this tournament, but he's kind of reached that too good for the World Juniors level, and he's not going to be playing for Austria. But no, it's I expect Pettersson to be a sort of third line guy for that team and chip in, and maybe PP2 as well with his shot and the way he can sling it on the flank. He plays on the flank on his power play domestically, so. Going to be interesting to see what he looks like in that roster. And he's a good story. He's played. We were talking before we got on air here, but he's played well, and he's sort of changed some minds this season. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with it.
Yeah, we're hoping Pistol Pete, we call him, Scott. We hope that he gets on the power play, because when you get a shot like that, it's definitely exciting when you have the man advantage. Final question for me here, and thanks so much for giving us so much of your time. We always appreciate it. It's a simple one. I think we wrap up every World Junior preview we do with you with this, but let's have your predictions for this tournament. Who's getting gold, silver, and bronze?
I think Canada's the favorites.
Nice.
It's hard not to be. The big question for Canada is what it's often is. It's just goaltending, right?
Yes.
And I shouldn't even say that, because that's actually stabilized in recent years. They had Carter Hart, they had Devin Levi. Like, they've had guys come through who were the sort of unquestioned number one. Levi wasn't that when he started camp, but by the time camp was over, it was clear that he was the guy. So goaltending is the question mark. They brought the tandem that won them gold in Texas. It's the exact same two kids. It's Thomas Milic and Ben Gaudreau. I think if Canada loses a quarterfinal, semifinal, or sort of medal game, it's probably going to be because they give up 4 or 5. And if it is, you're going to likely zero in on whoever of Gaudreau or Milic plays. Both have big game experience. Gaudreau started the gold medal game at U18s. Milic led Seattle on a really, really, really deep playoff run. They were a game away from the finals in the WHL last year. So they've been tested in that kind of a setting, and I think Canada feels good about that. But I mean, on defense, Canada's really deep, not as deep as they are at forward. And then at forward, I think they're going to score a lot of goals. So that part of it, I think, gives Canada the edge. After that, it's interesting. The Finns trounced, frankly, the Swedes in their last game before this tournament, 6-1 about a month ago. And I would have said prior to that the Swedes were probably my number 2, with the Americans number 3 and the Finns 4. But it's tough to discount the Finns. They always have a way of overachieving, and the Swedes always seem to find a way of underachieving. So
Yeah.
I still think I'm going to stick with that. I think I'd probably go Sweden 2, USA 3, or
Okay.
USA 2, Sweden 3. I think they have deeper talent, and they're definitely more talented at the high end than this Finnish team. This Finnish team doesn't have a ton of skill up front. They're going to be asking a lot of Brad Lambert and a couple of the guys up front. So it's going to be a good tournament. All 4 of those teams are capable, but I think Canada are favorite. The Americans, I think, are going to struggle to score, maybe like they're hoping. I think they're going to ask. They've brought a lot of checkers, and I think as a result, they're going to ask a lot of Logan Cooley and Cutter Gauthier and Jimmy Snuggerud, who I think they'll reunite from their NTDP days. They'll probably move Cutter, who's been playing center, to the wing, to left wing, and play him with those 3 guys. That line was so good for the NTDP. So that line, I think you'll see back together. And then you hope to get Chaz Lucius as kind of that second line center who can fill the net and be on the top power play unit. But Chaz, as has been the story throughout her career so far, isn't fully healthy and has been skating in a non-contact jersey in their skates. And they're bringing him, and they expect him to be ready to go, but who knows whether he'll be at 100%. So Americans are good. The strength of this American team is their blue line. Best blue line in the tournament, bar none. Luke Hughes is back as a returnee, and then right after Luke Hughes, they've got 5 or 6 guys who can really move it. They've brought a lot. Obviously, Lane Hudson, Seamus Casey, Ryan Ufko, Sean Behrens. They've brought a lot of kind of 5'9", 5'10" guys who can really play offense. And I think they've done that by design, because their forward group is more of a sort of go-get-it digger group. So they're going to need that blue line to create a lot of offense for them, and I think they will. I mean, we all know, even casual fans, I think, now are familiar with Lane Hudson and some of what he's capable of doing out there and all that. So, it's going to be, the USA group's going to be a fun group. Their question, is in net. Caden Mberko was great for them in the summer, but Caden's an undrafted kid who has some real flaws in his game that I'm not sure that he's going to be able to repeat his summer performance. And then they brought Trey Augustine, which is extremely rare for any of these teams to bring a draft-eligible goalie. But Trey Augustine's probably going to be a second-round pick, maybe even a late first-round pick if he keeps it up in this upcoming draft. And I would be really interested to watch that battle, because I think there's a chance you might see a 17-year-old steal the job, which never happens for USA. So they're going to be good. And then the Swedes I talked about, obviously no Simon Edvinsson, but the strength of the Swedes will be down the middle with Bystedt, Austin, and Leo Carr, probably a top 4 or 5 pick in the upcoming draft.
Absolutely fantastic analysis, Scott. I always look forward to reading those notebooks you do where it's just your raw thoughts scribbled out. It really kind of makes us feel like we're there, especially over the last couple of years when we felt further away from the tournament than ever. So everyone's going to be following along on Twitter. Scott C. Wheeler on The Athletic. Subscribe there. Scott, my final question for you is, do you know the lay of the land in Halifax where you're going to have to go for some drinks, some late night fun? We got a lot of East Coast listeners on the show, and I'm sure they'll be happy to help you out. But do you have any circled saying I need to get there?
I've not anything circled in particular, but this will be my third time in Halifax as an adult, so I'm not extremely familiar with the city, but I know the lay of the land in the city pretty well, and I'm definitely looking forward to that part of it. I've already got the off days circled, and there's actually going to be a much better group of journalists who are there with me this year, so I'm not going to be riding solo in the city. I'll have some familiar faces, so if I recall correctly, there's a good microbrewery scene in Halifax, so I'm looking forward to
Nine Locks is a good brewery. That was one of them that I really liked there.
Good robot.
Yep.
It's gonna be cold though. The wind off the ocean in December and January. I'm not looking forward to that. Although Edmonton was as cold as I've ever been in my 28 years on this earth last year. You couldn't even step outside. It was so cold. So
you're probably a little bit stoked about that summer tournament in Edmonton. It's a little nicer.
Edmonton. My perspective of Edmonton took a complete 180.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I live in Winnipeg, right?
I do know that you live in Winnipeg.
We know cold. But no, in Halifax, okay, the two spots everyone's going to tell you lower deck, especially on a Sunday night, live music, Signal Hill's the band, unbelievable. And then the Press Gang. Make sure you get for a dinner at the Press Gang. Best food you'll have in Halifax. That's my tourism part of Locked On Senators. But you'll enjoy yourself. We know that, and we're going to enjoy we're going to enjoy your coverage as well. So thanks for your time as always, Scott, and we look forward to catching up after the tournament.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Sick taps to Scott Wheeler. Thanks so much for him joining us, talking about the World Junior Championship coming up. And it's going to be a good one, as you heard from Scott. 4 different Sens prospects in there. That includes Scott. That includes Zach Ostapchuk, Pistol, Pete Oscar, Pedersen, Thomas Hamara, and our guy Tyler Boucher. But before we move on, today's episode is also brought to you by the Glebe Central Pub. We love our friends over at the Glebe Central Pub. They are the presenting sponsor for the postcast, and for a good reason, guys. It is your neighborhood-friendly pub in the heart of Glebe. You got to check them out. They've got tasty food, tasty drinks, great people. It's a neighborhood pub that's going to make you feel like you're among friends. And they love the Ottawa Senators so much. They've got shuttles going to and from the game. A great way to plan ahead if you're going to have a couple drinks. And the best thing is it's only $15. So you're probably saving a lot more money than you would on an Uber. They take you from the Glebe Central Pub an hour before the game to the game, and then right back to the pub so you can continue the after party, hopefully celebrating a Sens victory. Check them out at 779 Bank Street and tell them that the Locked On Senators podcast sent you. So normally this would have been a game preview for the Sens game up against the Detroit Red Wings tonight, but with that storm coming in, that game has been postponed. It's going to be played in February, either the 27th or the 28th. I forget which one of them it is, but the reason it's hard to remember is because they're playing the Red Wings in a back-to-back at home at the CTC on the 27th and the 28th. You don't see that very often, and I think if you're a Sens fan and the Ottawa Senators, you got to be pretty thankful that that's a gift, essentially, that the NHL has given you on this Christmas, because not only does it start their break a little earlier, but those are key points up against a divisional rival that I'm hoping, fingers crossed, they're going to have a much better roster when they do go up against the Red Wings later on, because if they would have played them tonight, you're looking at no Zub, no Mott, no Matthew Joseph, no Josh Norris, no Rourke Chartier, possibly no Jake Sanderson, as he left that game with getting a puck hit right up in his throat. So that could be something that he probably wouldn't be back from tonight. Tim Stützle just played a career high 27 minutes and 52 seconds. So he's probably gassed as well. So it's much, much better that you're going to be playing them later on. And we're hoping that at that point, Josh Norris will be back as well. So you're going to have a better roster. That's for sure. I mean, there's like 7 or 8 guys that I just listed off there that would not have been playing tonight. So it's going to be very interesting. And I think if you're playing back-to-back games, it's much better for the Senators that it's at home in Ottawa rather than the Red Wings where they're going to be on the road at a hotel. So that is definitely a blessing in disguise. That's all we got for today's show, guys. We hope you enjoyed our interview with Scott Wheeler. As always, thanks so much for Scott taking the time to join us, as this is a busy time for him. He's heading over, or probably is already over, in Halifax and Moncton right now. Again, Ross, hopefully he wasn't here on this show because he's trying to get to Florida. Hopefully he was able to do that. And from myself, I hope that everyone is able to get to where they're trying to go during the holidays, because this storm does sound like it's going to be legit. Be safe out there. Don't push it. If the roads are bad, just stay home. Nothing wrong with relaxing with the family at home. And you can do the classic video FaceTiming, Zoom calls with families. That's much safer. As our sponsors said, do not drink and drive. Be very safe this holiday season. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everyone, and thank you for listening to the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Brandon Pillar. We're your team every day.